Hello, beautiful people. It's Jennifer, and I am standing outside of one of my very favorite museums. I wonder if you can guess what it is. That's right, I'm outside the Rodin Museum. And there's a temporary exhibit on at the moment called Rêve d'Égypte, which is like Egyptian dreams or Dream of Egypt. And it's all about how Egypt influenced Rodin's work. So there are artifacts that he brought back from Egypt himself, and then some studies as he tried to recreate their art, and then we can see how it evolves into his art. And then I'm going to take you around his permanent exhibit to show you some things that you might not know. Yeah, so let's explore the Musée Rodin. Rodin discovered his passion for Egyptian art later in life. In the 1880s, when he was in his 40s, he began exploring the Egyptianized iconography that occurred in symbolism, a movement that was popularized in France around this time. By 1893, he was completely enamored and began accumulating his own collection, which he kept at his villa and its garden in Meudon. By 1910, he had amassed close to 550 items, and by the start of World War I, he had collected over 1,000 objects dating from the pre-dynastic period to the Arab conquest. When poet Rainer Maria Rilke visited, he said, quote, "And everything, houses, passages, and studios and gardens, everything is full of the most wonderful antiquities that associate with his dear things as with relatives. And he is happy and strokes their beautiful shoulders and cheeks, and from afar reads on their lips the inexpressible." From around 1890 to 1900, Rodin moved away from symbolism and began using his knowledge of Egyptian art to influence his work. He didn't work from a sculpted model, as Egyptian artists would, but created statues and artwork that he copied and individualized, deepening his research into the human body. He also used terracotta or alabaster Egyptian vases that he assembled with his own plaster sculptures, thereby combining the image of a vase with the human body. Here you can see an earthen sculpture of the goddess Baobo from about 350 BC, and here is the sculpture it inspired from Rodin in 1895. Rodin's collection continued to expand, and his passion for Egyptian art and artifacts spread to friends like sculptors Antoine Bourdelle and Clara Westhoff, and poet Rainer Maria Rilke. In fact, it was Rilke who gave this sculpture its name. Young girl confides her secret in Isis. And artist Gustave Léon Bazin created this engraving titled Portrait of Rodin holding an Egyptian statuette. As time wore on, Rodin's collection grew, with larger and more impressive pieces. As his style evolved, he moved away from Egyptian art, but the influence remained, and he never lost his respect for all he had unearthed. Towards the end of his life, Rodin wanted to create a universal educational museum in which his Egyptian art collection would be displayed in the first room. And towards the end of this exhibit, the influence of Egyptian art becomes more and more evident, even appearing here in these studies for the world-renowned sculpture of famed French writer Honoré de Balzac. Who stands in the garden as part of the permanent collection. This seems like the perfect transition to move to the permanent collection. As you look around the Musée Rodin, it's easy to see why I love it so much. Rodin studied the human body and imagined the skeleton and the muscles that would lie beneath the skin. There is so much movement, so much softness in marble and bronze. It doesn't seem possible that something so visceral, so emotional, could come from something so solid. But let's start outside with Rodin's most famous work, The Thinker. Now, this is a sculpture you likely think you know, but look again. Look closer. Sit down and try to recreate his position. Cross your right arm over your left knee, drape your left arm beyond your left elbow, and now try to think. How could someone so twisted up possibly think about anything except staying in that position and what it feels like? And that's part of the genius of Rodin. What you see on the surface is rarely what is. Take this statue called the Waltz. It's beautiful, they're dancing, and yet, look at his feet. There's no way he could support her like that. Or this sculpture called The Secret. It looks like two hands touching. And it is, but whose? Try to touch your hands together like this. You can't. It's the same hand twice. Is that the secret? And that gives us our hint for the last sculpture we'll take a look at before we go. The three shades, or the souls of the damned, which sit normally atop the gates of hell. Here they are, all together. And here is just one on its own. Take a closer look now. All three men are copies of one another. And yet somehow, each conveys a different emotion. Rêve d'Égypte will be at Musée Rodin through March 5th, 2023. And while the exhibit is interesting, the museum itself is incredible and definitely worth a visit.